Hey, everybody. I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode of the podcast, whether you're listening or watching. I got to have a really, really fun conversation with Jenna and Moraci, and we talked a lot about romantasy and genres, and we just laughed the whole time and had so much fun. The problem is there was some issue with the sound. I don't know what happened. I have no idea. I have not had this problem on any other podcast, but when I first downloaded it and listened to it, you could barely hear Jenna. It sounded like she was whispering. And I did manage to fix it. We got someone to help me do the editing a little bit, but the sound still isn't great. So I just wanted to warn you about that, I guess. You can hear it and it is very listenable, but there are parts when it gets a little bit muffled. And there are parts, especially when I am very loud. I tried to tone down what I was saying because I was loud and Jenna was soft. But there are still parts that I couldn't, especially when I just make little like, oh yeah, or uh-huh, or, those kind of comments that they're going to be pretty loud as compared to how loud she's speaking. So I apologize for that, but I do encourage you to listen to it because it's such a fun conversation. And Jenna is really, really knowledgeable about not only romantasy, but genres in general. So I think this is a really, really valuable conversation for anybody who wants to know about genre, is struggling trying to pin down their genre, and just needs to know more about it. So I hope you enjoy it. And I do apologize that the sound quality is not quite where I would want it to be, but it's worth listening to anyway. Okay, so let's jump into the interview. Hi there. Do you have a great idea for a fiction story? A story you're dying to bring to the world, but you don't know where you're going with it, don't know how to fill out a compelling plot, and have a hard time sitting down to even write words, much less finish your story? Even when you do write, do you worry that it's boring, that it drags, and that readers are going to hate it? So you stay stuck, write and rewrite the same scenes, and eventually give up, ending up with a file of half-written manuscripts and glorious story ideas on your computer. Hi, my name is Liesl, USA Today best-selling author and writer of 4 genres, and I've been writing fiction for more than 15 years. I teach fiction authors to write highly emotional stories based on elements of psychology and spirituality, with an emphasis on your unique subconscious creativity. Did you know that human beings cannot be emotionally healthy without stories? That we'd all literally go mad if we couldn't tell ourselves stories and derive meaning from them? It's true, and a scientifically proven fact. So, grab your chocolate of choice and your fuzzy slippers. Let's turn that story snippet knocking around in your brain into a full-length novel that will give your reader that emotionally cathartic experience they long for, make you money, and change the world. Who's with me? All right, everyone, welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Jenna Moraci today. Am I saying your last name right there?
Moraci. Very close.
Moraci. Okay. Moraci, sorry about that. She is an author, and also she does some craft writing to help other authors. So let's get started by, why don't you just tell everybody who you are and talk about some of the things that you've done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Jenna Moraci. I am an award-winning and Amazon best-selling romantasy author. The first 2 books in my romantasy series, The Savior's Champion and The Savior's Sister, are available right now, and the 3rd book, The Savior's Army, is on its way. I also write writing craft books. My first writing craft book was Shut Up and Write the Book, and it's a step-by-step guide to kind of helping you through the writing process. It's geared toward any type of writer, so if you're a beginner, it's very easy and palatable for you. If you're more experienced, it gives deeper tips and tricks for kind of honing in your craft. And I have my second writing craft book, How to Write Romantasy, coming out in October, so that's super exciting.
Nice.
It is my first delve into traditional publishing, so I'm usually a hybrid author.
Nice.
Yeah, and then outside of that, I'm also a YouTuber on the channel Writing with Jenna Moraci, and over there I just give writing tips. Lots of sarcasm, lots of humor, try to make it very relatable, and we also do live streams on Mondays.
Nice. Sounds like you stay really busy.
Yes, exactly.
Great. So, well, let's talk about your new book. I do have some idea what romantasy is, and I've read a little bit of it, but it's a relatively new niche as far as genres go. So why don't you, for those who maybe have never heard of it, tell us what it is and a little bit about it.
Sure. Romantasy is basically kind of, as the name suggests. It's a blend of romance and fantasy. I like to say, usually when you look at the romance genre, that's a book about two or more people falling in love. Something gets in the way of their love, but eventually they overcome the odds and live happily ever after. Fantasy is a story that takes place either in a fantasy world or in a world that has magic or magical creatures or both. And so we take these two concepts and blend them together. A romantasy is typically a story following a romance between two or more people in a fantasy world. Something fantastical is getting in the way of their love, but they find a way to overcome the odds and be happy together. It recently became a huge trending genre, and now it's everywhere. It went from being virtually non-existent to everywhere overnight. And so, yeah, so a lot of people have been expressing interest in it and wanting to learn more about it. And but at the same time, since it's a relatively new phenomenon, a lot of people really don't know how to navigate it.
Right, right. And I actually really like your definition of it. I don't think I'd heard it quite put that way before. So, I mean, obviously, romance is always, the romance is the central driving force of the story. And fantasy, usually you have a lot of world building and a lot of, whether it's magic or anything like that. But you specifically said that what's getting in the way of their love needs to be a fantastical element. And I hadn't actually thought of that before. That's super interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the more romantasy books that I've read, obviously, trying to hone the craft, the more it became obvious that everyone likes to think that their story is nuanced and different, and it is. Every story has its own unique spin, but when it comes down to the premise of the story, the basic building blocks, every story within a particular genre is the same. A mystery is always about solving a mystery, and at the end it needs to be solved. Crime thriller is usually about a murder, and by the end the murderer is revealed. With romantasy, it's always some kind of fantastical element getting in the way of the love story. Whether that was the initial problem at the start of the novel or not, it eventually becomes the problem. Even if you look at two romantasy books that are wildly different, the building blocks are the same. So the example that I like to give in How to Write Romantasy is starting with my book, The Savior's Champion. It's a story about this guy who enters this gladiatorial tournament just for the money. The winner of the tournament gets to marry a magical queen, but he ends up falling in love with someone else. And so the problem becomes, how does he survive this tournament but end up with the woman that he actually loves? So the fantastical element getting in the way is this magical queen and this magical tournament. Then you look at another romantasy book like The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen, which is very, very different from The Savior's Champion. But it follows this woman who, she's a princess from a kingdom. She's trained to be an assassin and a killer. She goes off and marries a king from another kingdom with the intent of taking his kingdom down. But she ends up learning about his kingdom and falling in love. And the fantastical element that's getting in the way is the fact that she's an assassin and she has this royal duty to kill this guy. So at the end of the day, it's always the fantastical element that's sort of putting a wedge in between in the romance, even if the stories are completely different from one another.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the world building element of it. For example, I know that Fourth Wing is a big one in this genre, and one critique that I've heard of Fourth Wing and the whole series is that there isn't as much world building, and a lot of people, I mean, it's totally a subjective opinion, but a lot of people think that there isn't enough of the fantasy. We don't see enough of the world. Now, I read it, and I didn't necessarily think that, but I will say that compared to other fantasy novels I've read, they do have a lot more. So what do you think in terms of world building? Is there one thing that characterizes romantasy, or is it all over the board?
That's something else that I touch on in How to Write Romantasy, is that when it comes to romantasy, you're going to have less world building than you would in a standard fantasy novel, especially like an epic fantasy novel. But you're going to have more world building than you would have in a romance novel. Romance is one of those genres that world building is very minimal. Like if it's a small town romance, you're just going to describe the quaint small town and that's it, and obviously fantasy and sci-fi are probably the genres with the absolute most world building. Romantasy, you definitely need more than a quaint small town amount of world building. But I always say, if you're getting into Tolkien territory, you've misread the job. You're not in the right place. This
Right.
isn't Brandon Sanderson.
Right. Right.
And so some people, they do want, extra world building. They want, 10 pages describing the leaves on the trees. And that's fine, but that you might be better suited for fantasy with a romantic subplot.
Right.
Which is not what Romantasy is. And also, everything's so complicated. Genre's always got to be complicated. There are two forms of Romantasy. There's fantasy
Okay.
romance and romantic fantasy,
Right.
which they're practically the same thing. But the biggest difference is that fantasy romance is a little bit heavier in the romance and lighter in the fantasy. I like to say it's 60% romance, 40% fantasy. And romantic fantasy is its inverse. So if
Okay.
you do prefer a little bit more world building, then you might want to sniff out romantic fantasy books. Good examples of that would be Blood and Steel, also The Bridge Kingdom by Daniel L. Jensen. Blood and Steel is by Helen Scheurer. They do place a bit more of world building emphasis. And you can kind of tell the difference because usually the characters get together romantically later in the book. And there's a little bit more
Interesting.
of a fantasy focus for, I'd say, the first 1/3 to 2/3 of the book. Then maybe they get together closer to the climax or something like that. And that's ideal for people who want a little bit more fantasy than romance. I'm the inverse. I want the kissing. I want the characters to get together, which both schools of thought are valid.
Right. Right.
I haven't read Fourth Wing, so I don't know which camp it falls into. But from what I've heard, there seems to be a lot of romance, so I would assume it's a fantasy romance.
Yeah. And so for the other one, for the romantic fantasy, how early do you usually see the two characters get together for the more romance heavy one?
Typically, what I see for romantic fantasy, and of course, this is not across the board, but the romantic
Sure.
fantasies I've read, usually there's a lot of sexual tension while fantasy things are happening, and world building is happening. And then usually around the climax of the book is they finally give in to temptation. And they have that big moment, Whereas
Uh-huh.
fantasy romance, they might have their first kiss within the first, 100 pages. That's not necessarily the case with romantic fantasy. So it's usually like
Okay.
a slower build, lots of
Yeah.
sexual tension, lots of flirting, a lot of that enemies to lovers stuff where they hate each other but they're attracted to each other. And then closer to the climax, maybe right before the climax or right before the breaking point, as I like to call it, they might give in and have sex or make out or something like that. They're finally
Right.
together.
Right. Interesting. So just in general, I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I just think this is interesting because like you were saying, genre is always fluid. And given how big this has gotten in such a small time, like you said, I mean, I think we're going to continue to see emerging genres or maybe we should call them subgenres or sub-subgenres. But I like being able to define them at least a little bit, like we said, always fluid, but so would you agree that I was just talking with one of my students about this a couple of weeks ago, that if in order to be considered a romance, like the romance has to be the main plot, right?
Yes.
And if it's not that, then it would be the other genre with a romantic subplot or romantic elements, correct?
What I like to say, because obviously there are books like historical romance where it's like half history, half romance, like fantasy romance. What
Right.
I like to say is, if you're not sure where you stand, remove the romantic elements. Could the plot still come to fruition? And obviously, if you remove the romance, no matter what kind of book you're writing, you're going to have to rewrite a few scenes, but could the plot itself, the main conflict, could it still be resolved? And so, for example, I like, my book, The Savior's Champion. It's about a guy who enters this tournament, falls in love with the wrong woman, and now he has to find a way to lose the tournament but not die. And if we remove that element of him falling in love with this woman and sneaking around and trying to, find a way to get out of this tournament, all we have is The Gladiator, which is a completely different story. It's not the same concept. It's about a guy who's just fighting in a tournament, and it's totally different story.
Right.
So that's what would make it a fantasy romance. Then we look at another book, a close friend of mine, Iona Wayland. She wrote Ashes, which is a dark fantasy novel that has a romantic subplot, and it's about this woman who's navigating a deadly magical forest in order to spread her brother's ashes. That's the only way her deceased brother can find peace in the afterlife. And along the way, she meets a mentor, and the mentor is guiding her through the forest. And along the way, she falls in love with the mentor, and he helps her spread her brother's ashes. It's probably my favorite part of the story. I love the relationship between the main character and the mentor, but if you were to remove the romance, he could just remain her mentor. He could just be the friend guiding her. The story would still, progress the same. The conflict could still be achieved. So that's how you know it's a romantic subplot and not the main plot itself, is because she could still spread the ashes, even if she's in love with him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, good. I really like that. So thanks for clarifying that. That's really helpful. So talk to us a little bit more about other tropes that are in the romantasy genre.
So there are a lot of popular tropes in romantasy. A lot of them overlap with just the romance genre in general, but some wouldn't really make sense in a contemporary romance situation. The most obvious one and the most popular one is enemies to lovers. People are obsessed with that, and the reason that they're particularly obsessed with it in romantasy is because if you're writing a contemporary romance and you have enemies to lovers, it's usually like, oh, it's that guy at school that I hate, screw him. Whereas in romantasy, it's literally like, that is the king of the kingdom that I am warring with. And so there's it's a lot higher stakes in that regard, because usually death is on the line in some way. Forbidden romance is another popular one where it's like, I want to be with you, but I can't. Again, this has higher stakes in a romantic setting because it could be, I want to be with you, but I'm promised to the queen and I'm not supposed to be with you, or we're from different worlds and people wouldn't, allow us to be together. That sort of situation. Some tropes that would look a little bit weird in the contemporary setting would be tropes like "Who did this to you?" and "Touch her and die." I mean, you could do that in those worlds, maybe if you're writing like a mafia romance or something like that. But that's basically like, the love interest sees that usually a female character, doesn't have to be, but usually a female character is injured, and "Who did this to you?" and I'm gonna go, beat them up.
Right.
And touch her and die is someone's threatening them, and it's, I'm gonna kill you if you do that. I'm trying to think. There are, like I said, contemporary tropes that overlap a lot. One is fake dating, fake engagement, that sort of thing. We see those in both. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. We see allergies are just crazy right now. But we see that in both the contemporary space as well as the romantic space. Another one that has kind of gone out of favor, but, is still worth mentioning is the love triangle. We see that in both contemporary romance as well as romantasy. Since it's kind of gone out of favor, it's typically just, the reason the love triangle has gone out of favor is because it has become a bit of a cliche in the sense that people just keep writing it in the same exact format. That doesn't mean you can't make it your own. And I think that's what people are looking for. You could still write a love triangle, but just put your own unique spin on it. We're seeing a lot of subverted love triangles where, we delve into the white shoes trope, which is where if you've got two people pining for you, why don't you just date them both? Like, why do you have to pick one? So that's another a popular subversion that's going on right now as well.
Yeah, interesting. I like a lot of what you said. I think it's interesting that the reason it's gotten so big is because it's higher stakes. I always teach my students emotion is always king when you're doing fiction, and that's why romance is such a popular genre, because it does tend to bring up the emotion in a big way. And so then when you marry that with fantasy, then you can have much higher stakes than you can in a contemporary, or, I mean, sometimes you see them a little bit in historical if you're dealing with like a historical battle kind of era, but anything goes in fantasy because you have magic open to you and you can create your own rules. So that's kind of cool. It's an interesting way to look at why it's become so popular.
Right, exactly. And if you still want the fantasy elements, but you want something that's a little bit like less intense, there's cozy romantasy, which is basically like a dragon shifter and an elf they both want to work at this tavern, and they start off butting heads, but they eventually fall in love. So you can still have the softer side of things that still exists in Romantasy, but a lot of people get in on the action because of the high stakes. It's a little bit more intense because it's not just love on the line; it's their lives on the
Right.
line. Yeah.
When you have things like fated mate and, all of that, it just gets to be a lot more intense, I think.
Right, exactly.
And let me ask you this too. I always wonder this because you mentioned cozy, and I know that there are other cozy genres that are emerging right now. People just liking the cozy stuff as opposed to the heavier or grittier stuff. And then we have the word dark, like you can have dark fantasy, dark romance. And I'm wondering how you define that, because to me, there's like two different ways to go about it. And I'm always curious as to which school of thought might be more prevalent. So you have dark as in just really dark, gritty events are happening in the story. And, so we're talking like serial killer versus cozy mystery. Or, I mean, a lot of times when it's dark, it's more like a sex thing. It's more like 50 Shades of Grey kind of dark. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's something that a lot of people are confused by, especially in Romantasy, because there's dark fantasy and there's dark romance. And
Right.
one's a subgenre of fantasy, one's a subgenre of romance, and both can be subgenres of Romantasy. And a lot of people get confused because, like, for example, I write dark fantasy romance and by that I mean it's dark fantasy, not the dark romance.
Okay.
And so a lot of people will hear that and they think dark fantasy and dark romance are essentially the same thing. They are completely different. So
Okay.
dark fantasy basically means the fantasy setting itself basically has a lot of death.
Okay.
So it's there's overlying like themes of gloom and dread, a very dangerous. It's just a darker tone overall. So I like. There's also a lot of horror elements. So for example, in my novels, when there's a death scene, they tend to be very violent and very graphic. So some of the death scenes can be gory, whereas in regular fantasy, it might just be like an arrow through the heart and then they're dead.
Right.
In mine, it's like someone's getting decapitated and we're describing it in detail. One thing I like to say, because a lot of people will just assume that if someone dies in the book, it's dark fantasy. And if that were the case, then all fantasy would be dark fantasy.
Right.
Someone dies in most fantasy books. So I like to say, is the book itself about death? So for example, like my friend Iona, who wrote Ashes, we know it's dark fantasy because the book is literally about a woman whose brother died and she's spreading his ashes so his soul can be put to rest. That's the dark, that's the death element. Mine is about a fight to the death tournament with all these deadly challenges, and there's people dying in every single chapter from this particular tournament where you're supposed to die. Other dark fantasy books I've read is where the love interest is the Grim Reaper, or things like that. Some books that take place in the underworld. That's how you tell that something's dark fantasy. There's some kind of horror element involved. Sometimes it's monsters. Sometimes it's just the fact that there's gore and violence. When we go into dark romance, and just to differentiate again, dark fantasy means the setting is dark. The fantasy elements are dark. Dark romance means the romance is dark. The love story is dark.
Right.
So that's where we take a look at things like dating a serial killer, falling in love with your stalker. We see a lot of dubious consent, a lot of romanticized sexual assault, things like that. And that's why I like to make sure it's differentiated, because those are totally different, styles that have completely different audiences. And if you're into dark fantasy and you pick up a dark romance, you're going to be like, what? What's going on? Like, what? He's stalking her. He's supposed to be the villain. No, he's the love interest. And vice versa. You could pick up a dark fantasy thinking it's a dark romance, and you're like, this guy is too nice. Why is the love interest such a nice guy? So that's where it gets confusing. But basically, if you're writing a romantasy and you want it to have a dark fantasy element, that means that the world they're in is dark. And if you're writing a romantasy and you want to have the dark romance element, that means the love between them is dark. It's kind of a wicked sort of love, and it's maybe
gray area,
yeah, maybe they're falling in love with a villain, like that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. No, that's about the clearest I've ever heard it described. And I wish that I wish that Amazon, and they have the money, they have the tech. I don't know why they don't do this, but I wish they would come up with something like a little widget or something where they could define different tropes or different elements in the genre, and then the author could put in what's in their book. Like, yes, I have dark setting, yes, I have dark fantasy, or whatever it is, and then it could come up with like percentages and say, okay, this book is like 50% dark fantasy and 20% dark romance, and then they could put that on the sales page, and then people would have a clearer idea of what kind of book it is, you know?
Right, because there have been so many, and the thing is, authors like I put trigger warnings at the beginning of my book. I put
Sure,
them
yeah.
on the sales page, but sometimes people don't get to that. So I've had people who would pick up my book and be like, "Oh my gosh, the prologue, a woman is murdered," and I'm like, "Well, it's a dark fantasy. I don't know what to tell you." But at the same time, it's not always super transparent. So authors can only do so much. That's why I do encourage authors, at the very least, do trigger warnings, because even to someone like myself, who I have no problem writing violence, I have no problem reading violence, but sometimes you just need to be in the mood, like sometimes you want something soft and fluffy. And so at the very least, provide trigger warnings for readers. But after that, there's only so much we can do. Because if we skip the trigger warnings, we're, I don't know what else to tell you. So Amazon could be helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wish they would. Well, and kind of a little off topic, but funny story. My critique group, where there's 4 of us that are authors, and we decided we wanted to read a book together because we've been together for years and haven't actually read a book together. And we were a little bit naive about it. We found something online. I won't say what it was, but it was a fairy tale retelling, and I thought it sounded really cool. I was like, that just sounds amazing, the plot of that. And I think we were looking for dark fantasy, but what we got was very much the dark romance, and it was just smut on the page, which we didn't expect. I don't know that any of us had a huge problem with it, but we just didn't realize that's what it was. And we're all pretty buttoned up, conservative, middle-aged women, and so we picked up this book and we were like, how did we do this? How did the book come? We researched it a little more. I'm sure there was evidence about what it was, and we just kind of picked it on a whim. But anyway, we still laugh about that. The fact that we picked up this book not really knowing what it was.
I feel like that has happened to everyone. And there was one book that I picked up where everything looked like I just wanted something fluffy, and sweet.
Uh-huh.
Everything about it, like the cover was like pink and yellow, and it just like everything about it looked like it was a rom-com. And I even went back and read it, and there was no warning that it was a dark romance. So this was not on me. This was bad marketing.
Yeah.
But then I read it and I was in a book slump for like weeks after that, because I was like, I was not prepared for this. Like,
right.
It was supposed to be cute, and I was in a cute mood. I was not in this mood,
Right. Yeah. You definitely get to the point where you need something lighter. Even reading the stuff that isn't dark. Like I've been reading some Brandon Sanderson, and his isn't terribly dark, but it's just, there's a lot. And so when you read it, like a thicker book like that, I'm going, okay, now I need like a palate cleanser. Now I need like a fun little romance for a minute.
Exactly.
Yeah. Alrighty. So let's see. What else can we say about Romantasy? If somebody wants to write Romantasy, what would you recommend in terms of like learning about it and getting to know the genre?
I cover this in, I think it's chapter 2 and chapter 3 of How to Write Romantasy. But the first thing I would do is researching the genre and reader expectations. And I say that just because a lot of people dive into a new genre and writing it just thinking they know what they want to write, and they just go into it, and that's fine. Like I still wrote the story that I wanted to tell, but you at the very least need to be aware of what the genre expectations are for readers, and see and work that with the story that you're trying to tell. Or if your story doesn't fit that at all, then that's fine. Just write the genre that does fit, that story.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, a lot of people go into romance in general with this thought, but Romantasy is the same thing. A lot of people go into it not realizing that it needs to have a happily ever after or a happy for now, that is a requirement of the genre. A lot of people cite Romeo and Juliet. They're like, but Romeo and Juliet is a romance. It ends in tragedy. And it's like, actually, Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. Like,
right. It's not a romance, yeah.
It's not a romance. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is just because because a story is romantic doesn't mean it's a romance.
Right.
For example, Nicholas Sparks gets brought up a lot, and I understand that like the movies are labeled as a romance, and keep in mind that movie determiners are different than book determiners.
Right.
His books are labeled as love stories, which is basically a story where you follow a romantic relationship and see how it changes the people and how, you know, they don't necessarily need to be together at the end. So if you want to write in the romance genre specifically, there needs to be a happy ending. If you're writing a series, it doesn't have to be a happy ending every book of the series. They could be broken up at the end of book one. They could be estranged at the end of book two. But by the end of the series, they need to be happily together in love. And
Right.
like I said, just because a story is romantic doesn't mean that it's a romance. And you know, I'll see lots of people be like, "Well, I really want to write this, you know, romantic story, but at the end I want them to end up with other people." And I'm like, that's great, you should totally tell that story, it's just not a romantasy, you know.
Right. Right.
And to be clear, it's fine if, like, you know, using ACOTAR, which is very popular romantasy series as an example, you know, Feyre is with Tamlin and then she eventually ends up with a different guy. That's fine, but it would be a problem if the whole series followed her with that one guy and then at the very end she ends up with a guy that we've never seen before. You know, like
Right.
we have to see a romance come to fruition and end up happily ever after.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I don't know if it would be quite the same thing, but I know that it probably wasn't a romance structure problem, but just in terms of kind of doing that and really pissing off her fans. The Sookie Stackhouse books, which I have not read. I watched probably a season of True Blood, but I actually got, just because I was curious, I heard there was this massive backlash, and so I got into the final book and was reading the reviews just because I wanted to know what happened, and basically that was it. She developed relationships with the main character and like 3 different characters, and then at the end she made her be happy with a different character that only had very little, you know, page time. And yeah, I don't think I don't think the author cared that much because she was done with the series anyway, but the readers, oh man, these reviews went on for pages and pages and pages. They were so angry. So yeah, I think especially in the romance genre, there's a lot of emotions flying around, and even more than other genres, you probably don't want to piss those readers off. They will vent online. So yeah, why don't you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the thing is that the romance genre is one of those genres that people read feeling a sense of safety, because in other genres, I don't know all other genres, but in most other genres, there is no guarantee at the end. In a horror genre, there could be a final girl, they could be all dead. You know, sci-fi, they could be all dead at the end. Even mystery novels, you know the mystery is going to get solved, but you don't know who's going to survive by the end. You don't know if anyone's going to be happy by the end. Romance is one of the only genres that there's a sense of safety involved, and people know that by the end, everything's going to be okay. And that's why people like the genre, is because it can, even if there's death and things like that, it can be a comfort read because you know your main character is going to be in love and happy at the end. Like there's that cushion, you know, waiting for you. And so if you go against the genre rules and expectations and you're like, just kidding, she's dead, or just kidding, he ends up with the nameless village girl. Like, people feel betrayed because they went into that with their guard down, knowing that you were going to take care of them. Like, they went into it for a happy ending, you know? And I think of a time where I read a romance novel, and it was marketed as a romance novel. It was not a romance novel. It was a tragedy. And it ended with the main character taking her own life. And the book was beautiful, like easily a 5-star book, but because it had been marketed as romance and I went into it with a specific expectation, the end just ruined it for me solely because the promise wasn't delivered on. You know, I was like, well, I was not prepared for this. I would have read this when I was in a place for tragedy, but I went into this thinking everything's going to be okay because you told me this is a romance, but it wasn't. And all things considered, if I had gone into it with the right mindset, it was a beautifully written book. There, you know, the only problem was how it was packaged and how it was sold to people. So that's the thing, is you just gotta be honest with your readers. You don't have to spoil anything. You don't have to say, like, this person's going to die and that person's going to get maimed. You don't have to give spoilers, but you need to be honest. Like, is this a romance or is this something else? Just
Right.
tell us.
Which is, yeah, which is why it's important to understand what the genre conventions are. And I think, yeah, if you can just, kind of put it all in one sentence, it's that you don't want to betray the reader's expectations. And I think that can be done in any genre. Like we said, it's almost a little bit easier to do it in some ways in a romance if you don't follow the conventions. But yeah, anytime you do that, the readers are going to be upset. I think story is very much about expectation.
Yes.
And
I
yeah,
I have a friend who's releasing a grim dark fantasy, and it has a romantic subplot. But I feel for her because romantasy is so popular right now. She's like, I don't want anyone to think this is a romantasy because it ends really bad. She's like, so all of her marketing is like, this is not a romantasy. Like, it's
yeah,
grim dark fantasy, grim and dark fantasy. She's like, okay, so and I respect that because it's like, let
yeah.
people know what they're getting themselves into. This is not, the Bridge Kingdom. This is more Game of Thrones.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, like all in caps, beginning and bottom and top of the blurb. No HEA in this book. And the funny thing about that is she's probably still gonna get one or two readers that go, "Hey, why didn't you tell me?"
Right. And that's what I told her. I was like, you're still going to get some people because some people it's like, la, 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 can't hear you.
Right, right,
There's
yeah.
going to be some, but you're doing your due diligence and you can see that by knowing you did the best you could.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you about this too. This is something that I've just noticed lately. It seems like there's been a few of these that I've read. How do you feel about it's truly not, let's see, what were the examples? One of them was a fantasy. One of them was more like espionage. I personally, I have a pet peeve when, okay, they're truly not romance genre books, but there is a heavy romantic plot in them. And they sort of the author like develops the romance between two people, like even just, it might not even be tons of page time, but just in the sense of the sexual tension, and there's an attraction there, and you can feel like they're connecting on an emotional level, and then they don't put them together at the end and they marry different people or something. That always bums me out. And I just feel like, yes, I know, I mean, it wasn't a matter of they marketed it wrong. I didn't go in thinking it was a romance, but within the story, I felt like they were building up to that, and then they didn't give it to me. So I feel like they kind of started to hint at it or promise it, and then didn't pay it off. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I feel like that's a little bit cheap, like, and they're dangling the carrot, and they're like, just kidding. I'm not a fan of that either, and I think some writers do it because they're trying to like divert, your attention, or I think some writers think that they're giving you a gotcha, and like, look, I'm so smart that I sprinkled breadcrumbs in the wrong direction, and look, plot twist. I think it's their attempt at a plot twist, but the thing is, I always tell writers a bad plot twist isn't one that someone is able to predict. A bad plot twist is one that just comes out of nowhere, because then it feels shoehorned in. Then it feels like
Right.
cheap. It feels like, oh, you just threw that in to be surprising. There has to be some thought to it. Usually there has to be some foreshadowing, and yes, you want to be as delicate with the foreshadowing as possible, but I think so many authors are afraid of being predictable that they end up
Yeah.
going, like I said, like the cheap route. And it's like, predictability isn't the worst part of a book.
No.
Especially in genres like romance, where it is a predictable ending. They're going to be happily ever after, or like mystery, it is predictable. They're going to solve the mystery. Like, that's just the way the genres work. But I think that's why they do it. I think they're dangling a carrot to try and put your attention elsewhere so that they can call it a plot twist at the end. And to me, it's just not. It's not necessarily betraying the genre, but it's just not great writing, and it's
Right.
sort of treating your audience like they're dumb. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's not my favorite either.
Every time it happens, I'm like, oh.
Right.
Yeah, well, I wonder too, at least I could say this with really newbie writers. I don't think it's as true of more seasoned writers, and I've seen seasoned writers do that too. But I think sometimes they're doing it like to be realistic because, plenty of people have almost relationships that just never quite come to fruition. But I also don't think that's good it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you want it to feel real and everything, but at the same time, this is fiction. It's not real life. And so, you want to more adhere to what people are expecting. And it's like a Chekhov's gun situation. Everything you put in, the reader is going to assume leads to somewhere, right?
It's also realistic to discuss the weather, but you're not going to put that in your book.
Right.
You're not going to have you're not
In
going
the
to be
dialogue, yeah.
right. Hello, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? You're not going to write that in the book, even though it's realistic. It's like
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I liked what you said too about this is something I kind of preach about too. So I think we're on the same page about this. Is just that I always tell people you actually want to reveal more, like as in foreshadow, and obviously don't give away the farm. You don't have to tell them what the ending is going to be. But like you said, probably the two most the predictable genres are romance and mystery, and those are the most highly read genres. I
right.
also use The Princess Bride as an example. He repeats that line, "My name is Inigo Montoya," like 35 times throughout that film, and that is the most remembered line, and that is the reason people remember it, and that is the reason they watch it, and you know what I mean? So, and that, like, probably the most powerful storyline in there's about 4 different storylines going on, is the revenge storyline with him. And so, like, the more you set it up and the more you hint, the more the reader is going to go with you. So don't stop being afraid of revealing too much,
And no one is complaining about The Princess Bride saying it was so predictable. He got his revenge. It's like,
Right.
it was entertaining along the way. So
Yeah.
that's the point.
And I think you're setting them up for it, and so that's exactly what happens when they get upset, because you set it up and gave them a promise and then didn't deliver on it.
Exactly. I remember I read a romance book and they were setting up the romance between these two characters for so long. It was enemies to lovers. And so you see the tension between them. And then at the very end of the book, there's a time skip and it's like 10 years later and they are king and queen married and expecting a kid, and they're like, oh, we're together, and they like share a kiss, and I'm like thinking, we didn't get to see, and technically they followed the romance rules because they're together at the end. We didn't get to see their first kiss. We didn't get to see them actually get together. We just got to see them once it had been 10 years into the relationship. I was like, oh my gosh, I still remember, I read that book literally a decade ago, and I still remember it. Like, we didn't get to see them get together. We just saw them be together at the end.
Right, yeah. That's no fun.
Yeah.
And moral of the story, don't be one of those people who writes that kind of book, because readers will remember you and hate you 10 years later.
Right. Exactly. Remembered for the wrong reasons.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Well, we've actually talked about quite a few pitfalls here, but anything else you wanna chime in when it comes to pitfalls of writing romantasy that people might want to avoid?
Pitfalls for writing romantasy. Well, like every other genre, there are cliches abound. And what I would say is a lot of people they see a new genre, especially a genre that's very popular, and they want to hop in on the trends. And I definitely think if you are passionate about those trends, for example, the trend right now in romantasy is what they call shadow daddies, which is basically a morally gray leading man who's probably a fae, has dark hair, probably has wings and tattoos, and he has shadow magic. And this is like very specific. It's a lot of the same traits. And if you're passionate about shadow daddies, then go ahead and write one. But just keep in mind that we're seeing, like, I described a fully formed, like, person, tattoos, dark hair, usually has darker skin, he usually has black wings, he has shadow magic, he has pointed ears. Like, we're starting to see, I've seen books where at least 20, 30 books with guys that look like that. So try to think about ways that if you want to write a shadow daddy, can you make him different? How can he, even if it's just, like, I've seen one that had silver hair, like, that's at least a start, just think about it. You can hop on a trend, but find a way to make it your own, only because once people hop on a trend, eventually it becomes cliche. That's what happened, with Twilight, where she was sort of the first one to have vampire and a werewolf. Who will Bella choose? And then we saw 5,000 other books where is she going to pick the vampire or the werewolf? What's she going to do? Or it was like the vampire or the shifter, or like the variations, but it was pretty much we're seeing the same thing over and over again. So I'm not saying to avoid trends, because trends are great. Romantasy is trending. I write romantasy. It's fine. But I would say that if you're passionate about the specific trending tropes, think about how you can differentiate yourself within it. Think about how you can put your own unique spin on it. Like, for example, I've seen people be like, you've seen a shadow daddy, well, I'm writing a water daddy, and he has like water magic, like, it's like, okay, like lightning daddy, but find a way to make it your own is what I would recommend. Just only because, yes, at the start, we're seeing a lot of people, they really want that very specific character, so they read 5-10 books that have a guy that looks just like that. After a while, though, they're going to want something different, and
Right.
at this point, we already have a lot of that guy. Like, let's think about bringing in someone new, a new daddy.
I'm gonna say, haven't I heard that before? I think shadow daddy is like a really funny term. I'm gonna have to remember that. There's gotta be some memes in there somewhere that we can post.
Shadow, yeah, I don't know. Like, for me, I'm just like, I'm not a fan of the word daddy, so every time I say it, I feel weird, like shadow daddy. Like, it's just awkward. But I mean, like, everyone's different. Do you?
Right.
I love shadow daddies. That's great. But for me, I'm just like, can I call it shadow gentleman, shadow love interest, something else?
Yeah, I would agree with that actually. Oh, that's great. Okay, well, I mean, we've gone over a lot of stuff. This has been a great conversation about Romantasy. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's about it. Check out How to Write Romantasy. It's available for pre-order right now.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, we'll.
So yeah, it's available for pre-order right now. So if you want to write your very own Romantasy book, definitely check it out. It's available at all major retailers. Well, as of this recording, I think it's only I'm not 100% sure, but I know for sure it's on Amazon right now. We haven't done this is like a soft launch. We haven't done the official big revealing of it yet. The big unveiling, that will happen in a couple of weeks. I don't know when this is going to go live. So, so I'm not 100% sure when the dates will align, but I do know that right now it is available for pre-order. So definitely check it out.
Good. All right. Well, yeah, I will put that in the show notes, and also your YouTube channel, and you have a website. Like, where else can people find you?
Yes, you can find me at JennaMoraci.com. That's JennaMoreci.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here with us and telling us all about Romantasy. It's kind of fun to talk about different genres and trends and stuff. I enjoyed talking about this. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute delight.
Thanks. And everybody check out Jenna's new book. Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped or inspired you in any way, would you do me a solid and leave me a review? Reviews help other fiction authors find the podcast. You can also recommend it to a writer friend of yours so they can get the same inspiration you got. Remember, you have a story inside you that only you can tell. So get out there and write your soul story, because your readers are waiting for it with bated breath.